Good morning, Pa. All right, so we got chapter 12, the Lost Middle Period. For all the surprising things we can know about what was in the Book of Mormon's lost manuscript, there's a great deal we do not yet know. Indeed, most of the lost pages' contents remain unknown, particularly the middle period of the Reign of the Kings, a lost period comprising over 2 centuries between Jacob and the destruction occurring in the year 320. That's Omni 1:5. While little detail of the period is known, for instance, no personal names and no complete narratives, the lost period's geographical setting and chronological arc can be reconstructed from our available Book of Mormon text. Footnote: it has been suggested that we do know a personal name from this period. Mosiah, 18:4, introduces the reader to a place which was called Mormon, having received its name from the king, being in the borders of the land, having been infested by times or at seasons by wild beasts. Several interpreters, Charles G. Eads, Daniel H. Ludlow, John Tvednis, Alan C. Miner, and Anita Wells have read this to mean that the place was named after a king called Mormon. Context suggests it means the place was named by the king, and that the king was Noah. The king is used 7 other times in this chapter and 42 times in the larger Noah narrative, always as a term for Noah. The phrase having received its name from frequently appears in books of Joseph's time to introduce an etymology explaining who named something and why. For example, the 1847 The Nautical Magazine and the Naval Chronicle reports of the derivation of the Nor and its having received its name from the Romans. There is little doubt, Oramouth, Ora Mountains, Oramouth, or mouths, O-R-E, as in the rocks, not anything else. So Ora, O-R-A, mouth, and Or, as in the rocks, mouths, Noor, and or an addition of an or, in or by the mouths of the Thames and Medway. If Mosiah 18:4 uses the phrase in the same way, it would be saying that the waters were given the name Mormon by King Noah because of its being in the borders of the land, having been infested by times or seasons by wild beasts. So he's basically saying that even though some people say that, well, sure, we know one of the kings was named Mormon because this place was named after Mormon, he's saying, no, by these people, the standard is saying that that area is called Mormon by King Noah. It was named by him that way. So that's what he's talking about. And what's really funny is he's right, because my favorite book in the Book of Mormon was always Omni, because Omni welds together everything that happens before and after and the Book of Ether all together in the timeline. A lot happens in that, 1 chapter book. Because I know everyone's like, I hardly have any room, I'm just going to pass this on. I hardly have any room, I'm going to pass this on. But what they put in there is so vitally important to saying, oh, so this is where we get Grandmer and the large stone and the 24 plates of ether and the, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really interesting that way. All right. So what we are missing, the Book of Mormon's lost manuscript consisted of a more detailed narrative of Nephite history from Lehi down to the middle of King Benjamin's reign. Although the small plates cover this same period, they provide far less detail of its events, focusing instead on prophecy and doctrinal discourse. See Jacob 1:2-4, which in my opinion isn't such a bad thing, but it does kind of suck that we're missing out on a bunch of these details because it could have helped in other regards. But even the reasonably rich narrative of Lehi's exodus presented in Nephi's first-person experience omits many of the details of his father's experience and teachings. True. However, after Lehi's exodus, and particularly after the deaths of Nephi and his siblings, the level of detail in the small plates drops precipitously. Entire centuries can be covered in just a few pages or even a few verses. For example, in the 9 verses of Omni 1, 3 through 11, cover about 120 years. And 4 of those verses fail to offer any narrative of Nephite history, reporting solely on the transmission of the plates between the record keepers, and leaving the remaining 5 verses to cover the entire history of this period. For perspective of how little narration this provides for that period, we can note that if the entire Nephite experience from Lehi to Moroni were given the same rate, 1 verse for every 24 years, the Book of Mormon would consist of only 27 verses. Ouch. The period between the death of Nephi's brother Jacob and the destructions of the year 320 after Lehi's exodus, likely associated with the prophet Aminadai, mentioned in Alma 10:2, and discussed in chapter 13. Yay! Foreshadowing. A period of about 230 years, half of the lost manuscript is covered especially scantily. For the history of the Nephite nation during this period, we have only some verses of Enos, Jerome, and Omni, and one external source that may refer to Lehite burial customs during this period, discussed later in this chapter. Footnote: I'm counting verses that narrate the general history of the Nephites during this period, rather than just the personal experience of the record keeper and the transmission of the record itself. I enumerate qualifying verses as follows: Enos 1:14, and also verses 20 to 25, Jerome 1, 3 through 13, and Omni 1, 2 through 3. So, his counting of verses was that. Lehite burial customs, interesting. There's a lot of people who have had different opinions of where the Book of Mormon happened. Some people point to the Andes Mountains because of like a third-party resource. Oh, no. Yeah, it was I can't remember who stated it was at the 30th parallel. And that was passed on. And so, well, the 30th parallel meant you're either landing in the Andes Mountains, South America, and you had the South American people with mummies and stuff. And so they say, oh, it's the ancient Incas. The other hand is 30th parallel is kind of like Florida. At the same time, it could also be in the Gulf of Mexico if they went around Florida. So you've got the exterior part of Florida, interior part of Florida. You have the interior side of the Gulf of Mexico if they're landing along the 30th parallel about. And so of course, the Heartlanders say it's going to be kind of close to it's going to basically be the interior side of Florida, or external side of Florida. They don't mind either. They just presume it's going to be Florida for the Heartlanders. And I don't know if the people who still believe in the Mesoamerican idea of the Book of Mormon. The two most likely places is Mesoamerica and the Heartland. I'm personally more for the Heartland only because of certain prophecies in the Book of Mormon and apparently the Eastern Native Americans having DNA traces of Israelite blood. But at the same time, there's some guys who go on Ward Radio that they are really from Mesoamerica, and they make some really good points about that too. The one part that I'm not sure about, like, to me, Heartlander makes so much more sense in a whole host of ways when it comes to prophecies and other things. But at the same time, them talking about going into the northern lands and then being good with cement, I don't quite see how that would be up in the Toronto, Canada area, or wherever it's supposed to be. But at the same time, just because I don't see it doesn't mean the archaeology doesn't exist. It just means that it hasn't been dug up. It's like less than 1 or 2%, both for Mesoamerica and the Heartland model. I mean, it's there, and they know it, but the care to dig it up is a totally different story. So it's kind of like, eh. But the one that always I found funny, but was like, interesting, was the ones about the Andes Mountains. Because I was sitting there, when he brought up the burial customs, I was wondering, well, what were the burial customs of the Andes Native Americans? Were they... There's places where they're mummified, but I was wondering if it was all mummified, and how close is that to Egyptian mummification? Anyway. All right. So, for the early history of the Nephites, we have both a rich record in the small plates and external sources, including accounts by those who have learned about the contents of the lost manuscript from Joseph Smith Sr. and Martin Harris to guide us in reconstructing the narratives of the period. For the end of the lost manuscript, we have some of the same external sources to flesh out the details, as well as a skeletal narrative of the Book of Omni and the Words of Mormon. In the Book of Omni, Amaleki covers the career of Mosiah I and the early reign of his son Benjamin in 19 verses of Omni 1, 12 through 30. While this extraordinarily brief, these 19 verses provide much denser coverage of this period than the 20 verses that cover roughly 230-year lost period between Jacob and the destruction of 320. And thinking of that, wait a minute, if it was 230 years, how old is the United States? I mean, oof. Within his summary of Mosiah I's career and Benjamin's early reign, Amaleki introduces 4 new proper names that become important to the Book of Mormon narrative: Mosiah, Benjamin, Coriantumr, and the land of Zarahemla. In comparison, the summary coverage of the earlier 230 years in the books of Enos, Jerome, and Omni mentions no one by name aside from those who kept the records of the period. So, what can we say about the lost period? The 20 verses of historical narrative in the small plates provide only a glimpse of the lost period. What can be known of this period beyond what we are straightforwardly told in these verses? Fortunately, although the information on the surface of the available text is scant, there is information from a few sources, including 1, close readings of the small plates text, which can tell us things not evident on the surface of the 20 verses. 2, close readings of Mormon's post-lost manuscript abridgment, which echoes and builds on the lost portion of his abridgment. And 3, a sermon of Joseph Smith, which refers to an otherwise unknown Book of Mormon text, likely from this period. 200 years of ascent and 200 years of decline. Though the small plates say only a little about the lost period on their surface, there is more that can be mined from their depths. One observation we can make about early Nephite history, though through close reading of the small plate text, is that the original Nephite nation in the land of Nephi went through an extended period of ascent, spiritual progress, and material prosperity, followed by a slow decline and ultimate destruction. The term original Nephite nation here merits unpacking. When Nephi first established his people as a nation, he set them up in the land of Nephi as their promised land, and there established his dynasty and built the Temple of Nephi. Some 4 centuries later, as discussed in detail in chapter 14, Mosiah I warned the people of this nation of impending destruction and took those few in the land of Nephi who would listen and led them on an exodus to the land of Zarahemla. That's Omni 1, 12 through 13. There they established a new joint nation with the Mulekites in a new promised land under the new dynasty, that of Mosiah I, and worshipping at a new temple. Mosiah I's exodus created a cleavage, a major discontinuity between the original nation and its successor nation. Rather than the same people living in the same place under the same rule, Mosiah I's nation consisted of a small minority of the original Nephites, joined to a much larger body of Mulekites in a new, previously unknown land, Zarahemla. and under a new king and polity, with Mosiah I's exodus and the subsequent destruction of the body of Nephites in the land of Nephi, and the old Nephite nation died, and a new nation was born in Zarahemla. A close reading of the small plates accounts of the first Nephite nation in the land of Nephi reveals the arc of this nation's rise and fall, 2 centuries of rise followed by 2 centuries of fall. In this arc, the early Nephite nation paralleled the rise and fall of the later Nephite nation chronicled in Mormon's abridgment in 4th Nephi, where the Nephites' pattern of progress culminates in the 200th year after the birth of Jesus and begins to lapse in the 201st year, describing a Zionic period following Jesus Christ's post-mortal ministry among the Nephites. Mormon notes that when 200 years had passed away, the Nephites achieved peak prosperity. Quote, "And it came to pass 200 years had passed away, and the second generation had all passed away, save it were a few. And now I, Mormon, would that ye should know that the people had multiplied insomuch that they were spread upon all the face of the land, and that they had become exceedingly rich because of their prosperity in Christ." That's 4th Nephi 1, 22 through 23. It would not last. Having reached their zenith, the post-Christ Nephites began their decline. Mormon identifies the beginnings of the decline with the year 201, again reinforcing the idea that the year 200 as the apex. And now, in this 201st year, there began to be among them those who were lifted up in pride, such as the wearing of costly apparel and all manner of fine pearls, and of the fine things of the world. And from that time forth, they did have their goods and their substance no more common among them. And they began to be divided into classes. And they began to build up churches unto themselves to get gain, and began to deny the true church of Christ. 4th Nephi 1, 24 through 26. Mormon's account of the earlier Nephite nation in the land of Nephi is lost with the initial manuscript, but the small plates account for this period. The small plates account of this period identifies the other Nephite year 200. 200 years from Lehi's exodus out of Jerusalem as the zenith of that nation's spiritual progress and material prosperity. In this account, Jerome, using the exact verbal formula Mormon would of the later Nephite nation 2 centuries after Christ, notes that the original Nephite nation achieved its apex 200 years after Lehi's family left Jerusalem. And now behold, 200 years had passed away, emphasis there, just because that's the same thing Mormon said, and the people of Nephi had waxed strong in the land. They observed to keep the law of Moses, and the Sabbath day holy unto the Lord, and they profaned not, neither did they blaspheme. And the laws of the land were exceedingly strict, and they were scattered upon the face of the land. Our kings and our leaders were mighty men in faith of the Lord, and they taught the people the ways of the Lord. Wherefore we withstood the Lamanites and swept them away out of our lands, and began to fortify our cities, or whatsoever place of our inheritance. And we multiplied exceedingly and spread upon the face of the land, and became exceedingly rich. Emphasis added, because that's, again, mirroring what he said above. We became exceedingly rich in gold and in silver, and in precious things, and in fine workmanship of wood, in buildings and in machinery, and also in iron and copper and brass and steel, and making all manner of tools of every kind to till the ground, and weapons of war. And thus, being prepared to meet the Lamanites, they did not prosper against us. But the word of the Lord was verified, which he spake unto our fathers, saying then, that inasmuch as you will keep my commandments, ye shall prosper in the land. That's Jerome 1, 5 through 9. Thus, the chronologies of the first Nephite nation and the second Nephite nation, with their respective after Lehi and after Christ calendars, coincide at this point, using identical verbal formulas, and in each case placing their nation's apex in the year 200. Having reached its apex in the year 200, each Nephite nation then begins its decline. Mormon makes explicit in his account of the second Nephite nation that the apex at the year 200 means that decline begins in the year 201. It seems likely that Mormon's missing account of the first Nephite nation and its apex and decline did the same in that nation's chronology. Jerome, in the small plates, leaves it implicit, noting the apex in the year 200 and subsequent trajectory of descent into wars and contentions and dissensions, when he again takes his nation's spiritual temperature. But he fails to highlight the post-apex year as the pivot on which the nation's regress turned. That's Jerome 1:13. Intriguingly, the chronologies of these two nations appear to correspond not only at the point of their common apex, but at two other significant points as well. A second evident chronological parallel between the two nations occurs in the timing of their respective destructions. For the latter post-Christ Nephite nation, its decline towards destruction would make 200 years, exactly 200 years, from that nation's apex. Moroni writes in the year 400 to describe the final battle at Cumorah, and to report that the Nephites are no more. Quote, "Behold, 400 years have passed away since the coming of our Lord and Savior, and behold, the Lamanites have hunted my people, the Nephites, down from city to city, and from place to place, even until they are no more. And great has been their fall. Yea, great and marvelous is the destruction of my people, the Nephites." That's Mormon 8, 6-7. The exact year when the earlier Nephite nation had reached its point of destruction, likely given in Mormon's detailed account in the Lost Pages, it is not specified in the small plates account. However, the chronological information about the surrounding events places Mosiah I's exodus around 400 years after Lehi's exodus from Jerusalem. Footnote, see John P. Pratt's Book of Mormon Chronology, and see also the dates provided for Mosiah 9-12 in modern official Latter-day Saint editions of the Book of Mormon. Sorry about that. Well, I guess nothing to be sorry about. That's Kaylee in the background. The destruction of the first Nephite nation at, or very close to the year 400 of its calendar, the same point at which the later Nephite nation was destroyed, suggests a powerful typological parallel between the accounts of the two Nephite nations. That the two chronologies are purposely presented with a parallel in mind is further suggested by the appearance of yet another common date in the two chronologies, the year 320. In the summary record of the decline of the early Nephite nation given in the small plates, the record keeper Ammoron reports a watershed event in his nation's decline toward total destruction. And now I, Ammoron, write these things whatsoever I write, which are few, in the book of my father. Behold, it came to pass 320 years had passed away, and the more wicked part of the Nephites were destroyed. Omni 1, 4-5. Ammoron accounts for this destruction in precisely the opposite way that Jerome had accounted for the Nephite prosperity in the year 200. For the Lord would not suffer, quote, "For the Lord would not suffer after he had led them out of the land of Jerusalem and kept and preserved them from falling into the hands of their enemies. Yea, he would not suffer that the words should not be verified, which he spoke unto our fathers, saying that inasmuch as ye will not keep my commandments, ye shall not prosper in the land." That's verse 6. And having inherited the record from his father, Ammoron then passes it to his brother Chemish, or Chemish, depending on if you want to say CH with a K or a Ch. In the summary record of the decline of the later Nephite nation given in 4th Nephi, the same year is called out with the exact same phrasing. It came to pass 320 years had passed away, to note a watershed event in this nation's decline toward total destruction. The record keeper Amos, having received the record from his father, passed it to his brother Ammoron, that's 4th Nephi 1:47, who was forced to respond to his people's growing wickedness with drastic measures. Quote, "And it came to pass, when the 320 years had passed away," emphasis, Ammoron, being constrained by the Holy Ghost, did hide up the records which were sacred, yea, even all the sacred records which had been handed down from generation to generation, which were sacred even until the 320th year from the coming of Christ. And he did hide them up unto the Lord, that they might come again unto the remnant of the house of Jacob, according to the prophecies and promises of the Lord. And thus is the end of the record of Amaron. That's 4th Nephi 1, 48 through 49. Sorry, I'm just thinking about, let's see here, 1776, 1976. Do you think 1976 was the apex of the American prosperity, and it's all been downhill from there? We're a really weird mixed bunch. I think about all the because of popular culture after World War II. You know, all the wholesome shows, I mean, compared to nowadays. And, of course, the strength through unity kind of push in the aftermath of World War II. Because, I mean, we all had to pull together during World War II. And then we kind of carried that over into the Cold War through the 60s and 70s and 80s. There was that kind of culture of, you know, we show dignity, we show prosperity, we show kindness. It's kind of hard to tell because the culture has changed so much. And it's just one of those weird things that it's like, there's still a lot of prosperity now. And it comes through technology and innovation. But I have to sit here and go, you know, we don't do tons of it's not that we don't do no manufacturing, but we don't do tons of manufacturing like we used to do. It's all done kind of like in China, because it's cheaper there. But it makes me wonder, like, could you chart the rise and fall of nations based on manufacturing, or is it currency, or anyway, we're just an odd bunch. The fig tree is getting ripe. Anyway, given how few specific years are noted in the 4th Nephi chronology of the late Nephite nation, and all the more so in the small plates chronology of the early year 200, is used to describe the nation's apex, that the nation is destroyed in approximately, if not exactly, the year 400, and that the year 320 is each nation, the precise year of a watershed moment in that terminal decline, with the event being recorded in each case by a record keeper named Amaron, interesting, whose father and brother were record keepers as well. An authorial hand appears to be at the work in shaping these chronologies to make them so tightly paralleled. Whether that author is the human author of the text or the divine author of history. Ooh, that's a good one. Don. Good. I like that one. Yeah, God's really good at patterns. I agree. One possibility is that his account of the apex, downturn, and decline of the late Nephite nation in 4th Nephi, Mormon presents these events so to echo his account of the apex, downturn, and decline of the early Nephite nation, which he had given in the lost pages. Since, in Mormon's original, complete account of the Nephite history, the last manuscript and 4th Nephi were part of the same work, readers would then be able to see that the later Nephite nation's decline mirrored or followed the pattern of the earlier nation's decline. While the small plates account is not structured by Mormon, it is implied to have been created for the purpose of filling the gap that would occur in Mormon's abridgment due to the manuscript loss, and it is perhaps thus also structured in places to mirror Mormon's later abridgment. Regardless of whether the small plates account is cohesive with Mormon's abridgment should be cohesive with itself. Recognizing the intended cohesiveness of Mormon's full account of Nephite's history, we can use his account of the later Nephite nation in the available part of his abridgment to shed light on what he had written in his lost account of the earlier Nephite nation. Seen in this light, various passages in the Book of Mormon take on a new significance. For instance, if the early Nephite nation had been destroyed 400 years after Lehi left Jerusalem, then Samuel the Lamanite's prophecy that the later Nephite nation would be destroyed 400 years after Christ, Helaman 13:5-9, was not the introduction of a new theme, but a reintroduction of an old one. In the context of that earlier history, Samuel was warning that the same consequence would follow on the same cause. Breaking the commandments would lead to the destruction of the second Nephite nation, just as has been led to the first. Only this time the destruction would not be partial, but absolute. This time, there would be no Mosiah to lead a few away on an exodus to yet another promised land. Dun, 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 dun. Textual clues on the geography of the lost period. Do I have enough time for that? Nope, I don't. But I'll tell you what. That's a good period. This is what's funny about the Lost Middle period is that my favorite books in the Book of Mormon are all these ones where so much happens with so little information. And I don't know if it's because in my mind there's so much that I fill in, or it's because of what little they do provide. It makes me go, how could that occur, and why, and do I see that happening now? Because I sit here and I go, okay, what if, what we have from Jacob is him preaching against doing unauthorized polygamy because of the problems that it causes. And we can still see that today in the, fundamentalist type branches that spun off. They all kind of have eventually, even that Allred group that they all kind of take a left-hand turn in Crazyville and start going like, what? Why are you going down that path? It just even the most ones that are like trying to keep things up have gone away into the land of authoritarianism, into a land of just things that don't promote freedom of choice and freedom of it seems to go in a bad path, and each of them go in their own weird ways. Like I'm really not a fan of the, oh God, what was his name? He was originally all about, having a personal relationship with Christ and trying to see and talk with Christ face to face, and that's all good. It's not Danites. It's not Davidian, because that's like the branch Davidians. What is his name? That's my problem, is all the bad guys, like, that from the Book of Mormon and stuff, I forget their names too. So, the people I don't like, I forget their names really quick. But I don't like them because they've gone off in odd paths that are just like, what? Because in some ways, since of course I'm not part of their group, I don't see the way they put their logic and their thinking into what got them to the end. I generally hear about the end result of their thinking and logic, and then I compare it to the regular stay the course gospel in the Church of Jesus Christ, and I'm like, what? So, yeah, I can't exactly completely badmouth them too much, only because, they're trying to do their best with what they have, but it just seems like between the unauthorized use of polygamy being what breaks the heart of their wives and their children, and then later on, you have Omni, where it's like, we've gotten really wicked, and now we're going to be destroyed, and we have to have an exodus. In 4th Nephi, it starts with them starting to wear costly apparel and not share things in common among them again, and it going downhill from there and being divided into classes and other things like that. Well, to me, it's always been weird to sit there and think about, well, I cannot say that has, in my life, it doesn't seem to have affected me. Like, I I don't sit here and think about how we're all divided in classes in America. But at the same time, it's like, it's not that it doesn't happen. In fact, there's pretty strong evidence that there is certain classes, but we're all kind of mixed over one another in different types of classes in a way. Because you have like this Hollywood rich elite that pushes Sodom and Gomorrah through the screen. And then you've got these tech company billionaires. It's kind of a different class to themselves. The rich financial districts in New York. You've got, to me, it depends on what you're focused on. Because you've got movies like The Devil Wears Prada, like people being all about fashion, and people who are in the rich, gentrified areas, the not in my backyard, rich kind of areas of just any city. You've got, well, Palisades, which are on fire now in LA. You've got Sandy here in Utah. You've got, Park City, if you really want to get to it. I mean, you've just got divisions by economics just because that happens. I mean, people who are rich afford places where it can be rich. And so rich people congregate together just because it's naturally stratified through the economics of it. But then it comes down to, okay, but, how much is this a, enforced classist system? And thankfully, because of how the United States was set up, the classist system rigidly among rich people is not so rigid. Anyone can become rich and anyone can fall from being rich. Does it still proceed to be along those lines? Well, yeah, because people who are rich tend to learn about the tax laws and making businesses and teaching people and their children to do the same thing so they can stay and keep their wealth. But, is it like strongly enforced and other things like that? Not in the same way, but I don't know. Is it one of those signs of destruction that we have divisions? But the funny thing is, like I say, I never felt like it has affected me. I know you had racial divisions, obviously, through the 60s. But to me, again, maybe it's mostly because I didn't live during that time. I lived in this blissful time from, born in the mid-'80s to raised through the 90s, where, sure, we had this kind of, it was before DEI became a thing, the diverse representation, but it wasn't, how they did it was they just had people there. And they had the regular, normal storylines, but with just different, like, think of the Magic School Bus and other stuff like that. It's just like, the racial divisions when I was growing up didn't seem to care at all. Sure, you'd have historical stuff in movies and about Civil War and about Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer and stuff, and it was like, yeah, it's good to know about that. And it was a good thing it was behind us. And then there was the revival during the Obama years of calling everyone racist, and now it's just like, and like resurrected the institution of racism and classism, just so they could feed off of it like some terrible beast. Anyway, I gotta get going, but I really love Omni and I really love 4th Nephi because even though they are scant on the specifics, I sit here and go, can I see the division of people through class divides, whether that's racial or social or, and then there's also the government class or political class or people who work for the government. So, do I see this classism destruction in all its different forms? Does it come from a different path? Such as not heeding the commandments of God, whether that's through moral means or other stuff like that. That's what is so fascinating to me about these books, and that they tie together a lot of stuff that goes on. We'll get more into the lost pages next time. Love you.